Hello, welcome back. This is a B1 English story. Settle in wherever you are and close your eyes if you'd like. Let your shoulders drop, let your jaw relax, and let the weight of the day begin to leave you. There is nowhere you need to be right now, and nothing you need to do. Just this, just the sound of these words, and a quiet story about people, and a city in November, and soup, and small moments of connection. You don't need to remember anything. You don't need to try. Simply breathe and let the story begin. The building on Cavell Street was 7 stories tall, and it was not a beautiful building. It had been built in the 1970s from pale grey concrete, with long, narrow windows and a lift that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. But it had a certain kind of warmth, that building, the kind that comes not from architecture, but from the people inside it. In the mornings, someone on one of the upper floors always seemed to be making coffee. The smell drifted down into the hallways, warm and dark and slightly bitter, so that coming home in the evening and stepping out of the cold sometimes felt, for just a moment, like walking into a kitchen. On the 2nd floor, a man called Mr. Osei played jazz piano on Sunday afternoons, and you could hear it faintly through the walls, just enough to know it was there, a low and gentle presence like weather. On the 5th floor, a young couple had recently moved in with a baby who cried sometimes at night, but the neighbours didn't mind, not really, because the crying was always mixed with laughter, and if you listened carefully, you could sometimes hear the father singing softly in another language, a song you didn't know, but a song that sounded unmistakably like love. And on the 4th floor, in flat 4A, lived a man called Andrew. Andrew was 34 years old. He worked in an office in the centre of the city, wrote reports that not many people read, attended meetings that went on too long, and ate lunch at his desk more often than he would have liked. He was not unhappy exactly, but he was tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't always fix. He had lived in that flat 4A for 2 years and knew the building well in the particular way that comes from daily proximity rather than friendship. He knew which step on the staircase creaked, and that the lift took exactly 43 seconds to arrive when you pressed the button on the ground floor. He had counted, once, on a slow Tuesday morning when he had nothing else to think about. He knew that flat 4B, the one directly next to his, had been empty for almost 4 months. And then, one September morning, it wasn't empty anymore. He heard her before he saw her. There was the sound of furniture being moved, a soft bump against the shared wall, and then the music, low and Spanish sounding, a guitar and a woman's voice, and then silence, and then the smell of something cooking, sometimes with garlic. Andrew had stood in his kitchen that first morning, making toast, and thought, there is someone next door now. It was such a simple thought, but it made the flat feel different somehow, less like the edge of the world, and more like the middle of something. He saw her a handful of times in those first weeks. The first time was in the hallway. He was coming home late on a Wednesday. his coat wet from the rain and his bag heavy on his shoulder. And she was standing at the letterboxes at the end of the corridor, wearing a dark blue coat and reading a letter with a small frown of concentration. He almost said hello. The word was right there, at the front of his mouth. But his key was already in his hand, and the lift doors happened to open at exactly that moment. And somehow the chance slipped by. He stepped inside, the doors closed, and he stood in the lift, looking at his own reflection in the metal panel. "Good one, Andrew," he said quietly to himself. The second time was at the letterboxes again, but this time she was already walking away. He saw only her from behind. Silver hair, a green scarf, canvas shopping bags in each hand. She walked quickly and with purpose, like someone who has places to be and things to do. And he found that he liked that about her. He liked it without even knowing her name. The third time was the closest they came to actually speaking. It was a Saturday morning when he found her waiting for the lift, carrying a small potted plant with bright yellow flowers. They stood side by side in silence for a moment. The plant had a strong, fresh smell. "Sorry, I don't know the name of that flower." She looked at him, then at the plant, then back at him, and gave a small, quick smile. "Calendula," she said. The lift arrived. He held the door. She stepped in first, then he stepped in after, and they stood facing the closed doors. "3?" he asked. "4," she said. "Me too," he said. She nodded. They rode up in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, just quiet, and when the doors opened, they both stepped out. She turned left and he turned right, and that was all. But he thought about the calendula for the rest of the day, though he couldn't have said exactly why. Maybe because it was yellow and November was so grey. Andrew thought about saying hello properly many times. He planned it even. He would knock on her door with some excuse, a question about the building perhaps, or invite her for coffee, or simply introduce himself properly the next time their paths crossed in the hallway. But each time something got in the way. He was too tired after work, or in too much of a rush in the morning. He told himself it would feel strange, too sudden, too formal. He told himself she was probably busy. He told himself there would be another chance. This is how city life works, he thought. People live side by side for years without really knowing each other. You hear their music through the walls and smell their cooking in the corridor and see them at the letterboxes, and still you are strangers. It is normal. It's fine. He said this to himself often enough that he almost believed it. But somewhere underneath the words, he wasn't sure it was fine at all. November arrived slowly. The city turned grey and gold at the same time, the gold being the leaves on the plane trees that lined the street below the window. Falling steadily throughout the month, watched them from his kitchen window while he drank his morning coffee. During the part of the day he liked best, before the noise began, when the street was still half asleep and the pigeons walked slowly across the pavement, and the city felt, for a little while, almost gentle. He stood with his mug in both hands and watched the leaves fall, one by one. He thought about home a lot in November, not the flat, which was fine, but home in the older sense of the word, his mother's kitchen, the specific sound of a door he had known since childhood, the dog that had died 3 years ago and that he still sometimes expected to see when he walked in. He missed being known, not famous, not important, just known. known by someone who would notice if he was quieter than usual, and who would ask, "Are you all right?" and mean it. City life was good in many ways, but it did not often ask, "Are you all right?" It was a Thursday evening in the third week of November when Andrew came home from work at 7:30, later than usual because of a problem on the tube. There had been a delay at Green Park, everyone on the platform standing close together in the yellow light with the air warm and stale. And he had eventually given up and walked the last 20 minutes through the cold November dark, past the chicken shop on the corner, past the dry cleaners with the hand-painted sign, past the pub where people stood outside in their coats, holding pints and talking, their breath making small clouds in the air. He turned into Cavell Street and looked up at the building. His window was dark. He had forgotten again to leave a lamp on. He took the stairs instead of the lift. 4 flights, his legs tired, but it was better than standing still, and let himself into flat 4A. He put his bag down, hung his coat on the hook, and was about to head straight to the kitchen when something caught his eye. A small white square on the floor, just inside the door. He had almost stepped on it. He picked it up. It was a piece of paper, folded once, handwritten. He unfolded it. The writing was neat and slightly slanted, with a small drawing of a spoon in the top corner. "Hi, I'm your neighbour from 4B. I made too much soup. Would you like some? No obligation. Just knock if yes. Clara." Andrew read it once and then read it again. He stood in his hallway in his work clothes and his socks, and he smiled. A real smile. The kind that starts slowly and then takes over your whole face. He read it a third time. No obligation. Just knock if yes. He folded the note carefully, put it in his pocket, went to the bathroom and washed his face, looked at himself in the mirror and said, "Go on then," quietly to himself, and went next door. He knocked 3 times. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he heard footsteps, quick and light, and the sound of a lock turning, and the door opened. Clara was perhaps 60 years old, not tall, with short silver hair cut close to her head, and bright, curious eyes that were very dark brown, almost black. She was wearing a dark green apron over her clothes with a small stain near the pocket that looked like tomato, and she was smiling. Smiling as though she had been hoping he would come, as though she had written the note and then stood in her kitchen wondering, will he knock? Will he actually knock? And he had. "You came," she said, as though he had done something brave. "I came," Andrew agreed. The flat smelled extraordinary. Garlic, warm and deep, and herbs, something dried and slightly sharp, maybe thyme or rosemary, and underneath everything, something rich and slow, like a stew that had been on the heat for hours. It smelled like a kitchen that was used every day, a kitchen that knew what it was for. Andrew breathed it in without meaning to. It just happened. "That smell is incredible," he said. She laughed, short and warm, and said, "Come in for a moment." Her flat was the mirror image of his, same layout, same windows, same slightly uneven floor by the bathroom door. But it felt completely different. There were plants on every windowsill, not just the calendula, but trailing green plants that spilled over the edges of their pots, and a large cactus by the radiator, and small pots of herbs on the kitchen, still labelled in Spanish in blue ink. Romero, tomillo, laurel, rosemary, thyme, bay. On the walls hung 2 large photographs, one of a coastal town, white buildings on a hillside above a blue sea, and one of a market, bright and crowded, with oranges and lemons piled high, and a woman in a yellow dress laughing at something just out of frame. Andrew looked at the photographs for a moment. Granada, he guessed. Clara looked at him surprised. You know it? I went once, he said, about 5 years ago, for a weekend. It was beautiful. Something shifted quietly in her expression. Yes, she said, it is. She went to the kitchen and came back carrying a large glass container with a clip-top lid. Inside was a soup of deep dark red, almost the colour of autumn leaves, with white beans and chunks of tomato and something leafy and dark green, and a single bay leaf floating near the surface. Fabada manchega, she said, my mother's recipe. I always make too much. She handed it to him. It was warm in his hands, heavier than he'd expected, and told him it needed 20 minutes on a low heat, not to let it boil, and to eat it with bread if he had any. I have bread, he said. Good, she said. They talked in the doorway for a while, neither of them sitting down. He didn't want to impose, and she didn't suggest it, but they talked easily, the way some conversations go from the very beginning. She had moved to the city from Granada 6 months ago to be closer to her daughter, who lived in Brixton on the other side of the city. Clara had retired from 31 years of teaching Spanish literature at secondary school, and she said, with a slightly weary smile, that she had taught Don Quixote every single year. Do you love it? Andrew asked. Don Quixote? I love it, she said, and I am very, very tired of it. He laughed. She had come to London partly for her daughter and partly for her grandchildren, 2 of them, aged 4 and 7. The 7-year-old was learning chess, she said, with great pride. The 4-year-old was learning to be a tornado, she said, tornado in Spanish, which sounded the same but rounder. And Andrew smiled. She missed Granada, she said. She missed the sun, not just the warmth, but the quality of the light. The way it hit the stone walls in the late afternoon and made everything look golden. She missed the noise of the market near her old flat, the vendors calling out, the smell of fresh bread at 7 in the morning, the particular sound of the city waking up. London has different sounds, she said thoughtfully, but I am learning them. Settling in, Andrew said. Yes, she said, little by little. He told her what he knew, the good bakery, 2 streets away, Portuguese, open from 6 in the morning, with custard pastries worth the queue. The park that was beautiful in winter if you went early enough, before the joggers arrived, when the frost was still on the grass and everything was quiet and silver. The number 38 bus, which was always late and always crowded and best avoided. The number 19, reliable, with a good view from the top deck. The library on the high street, warm in winter, with good armchairs near the window, and a librarian called Margaret who knew everything about local history. Small things, useful things, the kind you only learn by living somewhere for a while. Clara listened carefully, and at some point she produced a small notebook from her apron pocket and wrote down the bakery's street name. I will go tomorrow morning, she said firmly. When Andrew finally said goodnight and went back to his own flat, he stood in his kitchen for a moment, the container of soup on the counter in front of him, still warm. He found a small saucepan and poured it in carefully. The colour was extraordinary in the kitchen light, that deep red with the bright white of the beans, and turned the heat to low. He found his bread, half a sourdough loaf from 2 days ago, that was still good, and cut a thick slice. He found his favourite bowl, the wide one with the blue rim, and set it on the table with the spoon. And then he waited. He was not usually good at waiting. He checked his phone, then thought better of it and put it face down on the counter, and simply stood by the stove and watched the soup heat slowly. Small wisps of steam began to rise from the surface. The garlic smell was still there, and now something else was coming through. Something slightly sweet, the tomatoes perhaps beginning to caramelize gently at the bottom. He stirred it once, turned the heat a little lower, and waited. After 20 minutes, he poured it into the bowl and sat down at the table. He picked up the spoon and took the first mouthful. It was warm and rich and slightly smoky. There was something in there, some spice, that caught gently at the back of his throat. There was a depth to the flavour that only comes from long, slow cooking, from patience, from knowing that some things cannot be rushed. He tore the bread and used it to catch the last drops at the edge of the spoon, and he ate slowly, without hurrying, while outside the November wind moved quietly through the plane trees, making a loud and steady sound like breathing. He thought about Clara, alone in her flat 6 months ago, new to the city and not yet knowing anyone, making her mother's recipe because some things feel like home no matter where you are. The smell of garlic, the weight of a familiar pot in your hand, the knowledge that you have made this before and it has always worked. He thought about all the people in all the flats in this building. Mr. Osei on the second floor, who played jazz on Sunday afternoons, the couple on the 5th floor and their baby, the woman on the 3rd floor who always had parcels stacked in the hallway, the quiet man on the 6th floor had seen exactly twice in 2 years, once going in, once going out, each of them with their own story, their own reasons for being here, their own homesicknesses, their own small joys, their own kitchen smells, their own Thursday evenings. The thought didn't make him sad, not exactly. It made him feel part of something, even if that something was invisible, even if it was just the shared smell of cooking in a corridor, or the sound of a piano through a wall, or a handwritten note with a small drawing of a spoon. He washed the bowl and the spoon, filled a glass of water and put it by his bed, brushed his teeth and turned off the kitchen light. The flat was dark now except for the orange glow of the street lamp coming through the curtains, which made everything look soft and warm. He pulled back the covers and got into bed, lay on his back for a moment looking up at the ceiling, and heard, faintly, from next door, music, low and Spanish, a guitar, a woman's voice, and then, quietly, nothing. Let the story settle now. Let your breathing slow. Andrew came home tired one Thursday evening. He found a note under his door. His neighbour from 4B had made too much soup. Her name was Clara. She had silver hair and bright, curious eyes. She had come from Granada to be closer to her daughter. She missed the light, but she was settling in little by little. Andrew knocked on her door. They talked in the doorway about soup and buses and a bakery 2 streets away, about chess and tornadoes, about what it means to know a city. He went home with a container of warm soup. He heated it slowly. He ate it with bread. He felt unexpectedly less alone. Sometimes a small act of kindness changes something. Not everything, just something. A door that was closed opens a little. A city that felt large becomes a little smaller. A Thursday evening that was ordinary becomes something worth remembering. Let your breathing slow now. Your body is heavy and warm. Your mind is growing quiet. Think of one person in your life who made you feel less alone, even in a small way. A note, a cup of tea, a question asked with care. Let that thought sit gently with you. You don't need to hold it tightly. Just let it be there, like warmth, like the smell of something good cooking in the next room. You are safe. You are resting. Let the words drift away now, like leaves on a November street, falling softly, one by one. Good night. Sleep well.